As we all draw closer to the Pesach, also known as Passover, season, year by year, the Scriptures command us to examine ourselves more than any other time of the year. Before Yom Kippur, that fast is another good time for examining. But this time of the year, the Scriptures command it even more so than other times of the year. You know, every year we've got planks or slivers in our eye, spiritually speaking, that we need to examine and to see where we can find them in ourselves. And it's important, yes, to examine ourselves all year round. You know, of course, that's important to do all year round. But as for those of you who know exercise physiology, like myself do, we know that, well, there's times where we got to, you know, not just talk the talk here, because you know I do like to exercise, and I know quite a bit about that and health and nutrition. But as anyone who's training for anything, for health, for fitness, you look at professional athletes, if you're training daily to reach goals or to maintain or to improve yourself in any way, you have to have days that are high-intensity days, and you have recovery days, low-intensity days, moderate-intensity days. You can't just go high-intensity all the time, 24/7. And so they're like interval training. You've got the high-intensity, and then you got the recovery, and then you go back to it. Well, before we get to Pesach, every year, it's at one of these high-intensity days, you know, time periods that we need to examine ourselves. And not to just be boastful about being fit and healthy physically, as the Apostle Paul, we also know him as. In 1 Timothy 4, verse 8, he says, "For bodily exercise profits a little, but godliness," can I say yahliness, "is profitable for all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come." So, yeah, we do need to take care of our physical temples, of the Ruach, that spirit. But the spiritual and the physical are important, but the spiritual is a higher priority, even when it comes to circumcision, as we can see from the Scriptures. Yeah, you could be physically circumcised but as a man, but to be circumcised of the heart is even a higher priority. And so understanding the physical and how the physical does affect the spiritual, and we don't want to do one without the other. We've got to have that right combination and to have the right balance and the right priorities. That leads us to this video teaching. As I titled this message, "Examine Self Before Pesach." Now, Pesach is in more reference to the lamb, or we can say lambs, plural, if we're talking about the sacrificial system, and also all us human beings as being lambs. When you look at the Hebrew word, the emphasis is on the Pesach, the lambs, more than the Passover. A lot of times in English you see the word Passover, but you look at the Scriptures like Exodus 12:21 there, where it says, "Kill the Passover." And a lot of times in a lot of Christians that come from Christian backgrounds who start keeping the feast days, when you hear the word Passover, you think of death angel, and that causes some differences of opinion on the calendar on when to keep Passover, at the beginning of the 14th, the end of the 14th. I'm not going to get into that video teaching here, but I want to emphasize the importance of Pesach, Passover, being more so on the lambs, when they are to die. And we know that's got to be on the 14th. And whether you think it's on the beginning or ending of the 14th, the important thing is understanding that Pesach, it's more than just saving our own skins. And we do know in, is it Philippians chapter 2, verse 12, where it says, yeah, we got to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, but I put the word more so. It's more than just trying to save our own skins. Passover, Pesach, is more about the lamb dying for us, and the lamb's plural, as well. There's some duality in understanding that, because as Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 and 25, he said, "If anyone wants to follow after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake," again, for his sake, "will find it." So it's not just he died and he done it all for us. There is a part of us that also has this sharing of some kind of cross to bear in our life as believers. And it's not just one interpretation. Of course, I'm not trying to take a cookie-cutter approach to this, and it's not a hyper-literal interpretation. Some people, like Peter, had to be crucified 2,000 years ago, but those forms of executions don't exist today. But there's crosses that we have to bear. There's difficulties and sacrifices for others, as Paul is quoting him here in Romans 12:1 and 2. He says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of Yah, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice." Interesting, that Greek word, Strong's 2189, pronounced something like zeo, means lively, a lively sacrifice, or quick, kind of like a fish. Fishes are quick and they're lively, and any dead fish, right, can just float along with the current. But we want to be lively fish. We want to be able to go upstream against the current if we need to get wherever he wants us to go in our life. So we want to be holy, as it says, kodesh, say in Hebrew, acceptable to him, which is your reasonable service. Now, it's not just a blind faith or emotional pump you up type of a faith or a religion. It's reasonable. That Greek word 3050 in the Strongs, logikos. That's where we get the word logical. It even says that when you look it up. Logical, rational. I put the word intelligent. It's an intelligent service. It takes intelligence to walk this walk accurately. And so in the beginning stages, it's like baby steps. We're learning this way. We're walking. We're trying to learn how to walk without falling and stumbling. And you go to Acts 15, the Jerusalem conference, you see, now, okay, they're giving the Gentiles these 4 commandments. Those are like a starter pack. These are not the only 4. There's a whole lot of 10 commandments that are not even in those 4, right? Murder, lying, stealing. So they weren't trying to address, okay, there's only 4 commandments for Gentiles to keep. There's a starter pack when people are new and they're turning to God, as it says there. And so, but this walk is something that we improve with. We learn and we grow. And this is why examining ourselves is so important, especially the high-intensity time periods where it's commanded. And this time of year, as I'm recording this, is more important than any other time of the year, just shortly before Pesach, as you'll see as we dive into these scriptures. But verse 2 here, getting back to the notes here in the outline, it says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed." Transformation, right? We want transformation. "By the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of Yah." So we want to understand what his will is, and sometimes we just don't know. And we need to keep searching and seeking wise counsel and hearing his voice, because only his sheep will hear his voice. And if we are one of his sheep, if we're one of his lambs, we're going to hear the voice. But sometimes it takes a while, and sometimes we have to keep knocking and asking and seeking, and eventually we'll find the answers. But yes, we know who that ultimate lamb is. We are all lambs. We all can be like sheep. As we bear his cross, as we have to be living sacrifices. As John says here, he says, in John 1:29, it says, "And he sees Yeshua coming to him and says, Behold, the Lamb of Yah, who takes away the sin of the world." Yeah, so I don't want to try to say that he's not the ultimate lamb. He is, but we also are like lambs. As we know that, remember when he says, when he says we got to walk as he walked in 1 John 2, verse 6. Bear his cross also. Again, not too hyper literally, but we are like lambs and sheep too. As he said to Kepha, Shimon Kepha, Peter, he said, do you love me? Recorded in John 21, verses 15 through 17. And he says, yeah, sure, I love you. And he asks him a second time, and a third time, and notice his answers are different. Sometimes he says, well, feed my lambs. And then a couple times he says, feed my sheep. Lambs are young, right? They're not full-grown sheep, babes. They're babes in this walk, in the faith. And we got to be careful not to make them stumble, because it'd be better to tie a millstone around our neck and throw ourselves and let ourselves drown in the water than to cause one of these babes to stumble. So we got to be careful with new people coming along, to be more careful not to offend them or get them turned off. And so there's feeding lambs and feeding sheep, and there's shepherds that he calls, but only one chief shepherd, only one high priest now, Melchizedek. And we all don't want to preach too much to the choir. We understand that. There's more reminders here, as it said in James chapter 19 through 20. He says, my brothers and sisters, quoting from the Tree of Life version, if anyone among you strays from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know that the one who turns a sinner from the error of his ways shall save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. So it's not just Yeshua. Of course, he died for the sins of the world. He's the ultimate sacrifice, but we have this part to play. We're part of his body. There's a lot of metaphors we can tie into this, that we are lambs, we are sheep, we are to be sacrifices too. It's not just he did it all for us, so we don't have to. The way a lot of people interpret Matthew 5:17, well, he fulfilled it, so we don't have to, and add some words in there. No, he did it so we can too. He fulfilled it so we can too. And it's not in my notes, but that interesting Greek word, plerou, meaning fulfilled, is the same Greek word used 2 chapters earlier in Matthew 3, where he says he goes to Yochanan, John, for baptism, and he gets turned down. And he says, what, me? Baptize you? Me immerse you? And he says, yeah, you need to baptize me so that all righteousness may be fulfilled. Right? He didn't fulfill baptism so we don't have to. He didn't fulfill Torah so we don't have to. He did it so we can too, but we need his help. We need his power. There's some things we have control over, and we can change, and we can do, but some things we need his power and help when we're doing our best to strive for perfection. As Yeshua said in Matthew 5:48, not in my notes here, but he says, be perfect, or you can say mature, as our Father in heaven is mature. Well, of course, he's perfect too, isn't he? So it's synonymous. It's like a homonym. We're to strive to become like him. And it's a growth process. It's something that we should see a learning curve. We might fall backwards or drip down on that learning curve, but we got to keep getting back on track and trying to learn and improve from our mistakes and our slip-ups, our trials that we go through. And so we all have this part to play with this ministry. There's also the Ezekiel watchman. In Ezekiel 33, 1 through 11, you don't have to be an Ezekiel watchman yourself, but he says you can look from someone in your territory and set him up as your watchman and support him. And you can help warn people in that way. You don't have to go out and go door to door. That's not your calling, street evangelism. Some people get into those ministries, and if you see someone doing a good job with it, it's good to support them. And Yeshua said that if you support a prophet, you'll receive the rewards of that prophet, or even a righteous person. It doesn't have to be a prophet. If you support righteous people who are doing a work and doing a ministry, you will share in their rewards. So it's like a treasure also being stored up in heaven. And so together as a body, we can support one another in different ministries. And also, as I've pointed out from some scripture already, that we are to be our brother's keeper. and to a certain degree with right balance, and only in obvious, really obvious, observable ways, and not just spying on people and trying to be really judgmental or condemning. But when things come up, and say, oh, whoa, you're doing that? Don't you know that's one of the 10 Commandments? Or whatever. And well, it's good to kind of try, if you're friendly with someone, you know someone, the more you know them, the easier it is to try to approach them on some of these levels, as James says, to help turn people from sinful ways. And so we can, as a body, we can grow, and we can also outreach to the world with those who are gifted to outreach to the world and support one another in different ways. And these are things to examine ourselves as we get closer to these specialized holy days for this, to remove the planks and the slivers first, before we start trying to help others, of course. You know, as we say, there's planks, it's a big piece of wood, but I say sliver, like, you know, sometimes we get these little tiny slivers in our skin, and they're so annoying. Sometimes we don't even see them or notice them until it starts getting a little swollen because there's a little bit of infection going on in there, and it's trying to get its way out, and sometimes you have to wait for it to come out before you can really dig it out. These little tiny slivers are sometimes hard to get out of our skin. When they get in our eye, ooh boy, get a little piece of sand in your eye, and that's real painful, right? But not to go off on too much of a tangent, but notice here in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 4, starting here, it says, judge. That Greek word 29:19 is krino, which means to condemn, to punish, or to avenge. Judge not. So we've got to be careful about condemning and punishing or avenging. He says, judge not, that you not be judged. He's talking about you're going to be judged equally as you judge others. And judge can also mean discerning. It's a homonym word as well. It can also mean discerning. But you look at the context here. Verse 2, for with what judgment you judge, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck, or I put in there the sliver, it's my little commentary with the brackets, in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? So there's something bigger in your eye that you can't see, and this little tiny thing you're trying to help someone out with. We have to really be careful before we try to approach others with whatever problems and sins. So I'm kind of throwing this in as a little caution here if you feel inspired to do that. But this is a time where it's mostly about ourselves and examining ourselves, but sometimes these things come up. In verse 4, or how can you say to your brother, and of course, those of you who know Greek and Hebrew, it's a masculine, feminine language. So when it's given a masculine term there, like brother, when you're including both men and women, you take the masculine view. So that's why a lot of these translations will say brother, but it's actually referring to women too. So don't you women out there, don't think this excludes you. Of course, I don't think anyone does, but some people get sensitive about the masculine, feminine in our modern society. But continuing on here, he says, go back to verse 4 here. Or how can you say to your brother or sister, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? In other words, it's talking about the same type of sin. Some people look at this and say, oh, well, you can't go help someone or correct somebody or your brother or sister if you're still a sinner. You've got to sin. You know, wait till you're perfect and you're not doing any sins. And so they take an extreme view, one side of the ditch, where you just can't try to help and correct and bring people more accurately into the faith. And then the other extreme is to just be what they also call Torah terrorists out there. They just want to go out and they're really offensive, and they're just judging and condemning people, and as if you're going the whole turn or burn type thing to fellow brothers who are sincere and just because they disagree on certain topics or issues. So trying to find this right balance here and understanding these scriptures, it's talking about hypocrisy. It's talking about the same type of sin. You got to really make sure if you're going to try to help someone out to overcome a certain problem, do it in love. and try to make sure you don't have the same things, and you might not see it in yourself, and you got to listen to them. They'll say, hey, well, you're doing this, you're telling me not to do it, but you're doing it too in a slightly different way, isn't it? And you can kind of ration and reasonize together. In love, it can be an iron sharpening iron. This says in Proverbs 27:17, if my memory is right. And those of us who have worked in metal shop, we know when iron sharpens iron, often sparks tend to fly. And so, doing this and trying to sharpen each other, it can get kind of heated, and some sparks can fly, and some fiery darts can really hurt too. Hopefully, not those big, painful ones. But the word of Yah is sharp, yes, and it's like a two-edged sword, so it can cut both ways. You can really cut your brother down in the heart, but it can also cut you if you're not careful or if you're guilty of the same things. And he says here, continuing in verse 5, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Yeah, something to think about there. But examining ourselves, this is something that's really getting to the point to before you try to even help someone. Examine yourself. Make sure you don't have the same sins before trying to correct somebody or help somebody else. And especially before this Pesach, as the lambs, as we being lambs to a degree, but the ultimate lamb has done, he's paid the death penalty for us. But in some regards, we are to bear a cross, bear the burdens of being believers. And on this 14th, we are to examine ourselves, and if something needs to die in us that's not right with him, it needs to die. Here in Matthew 5:21 and 22, it says, and Yeshua Messiah said regarding murder in the heart, he says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother, notice it's talking about a brother, without a cause. Okay, there's righteous forms of anger. So he's not saying that you can never be angry, but it's got to be without a righteous cause. You're in danger. You're putting yourself in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, again, this is a masculine, feminine language that it's translating from, so it's referring to mishpacha, as we say in Hebrew, brethren or family. He says, if you say to someone who's family, racha, which even that Greek word is pronounced racha, the Greek 4469, it's kind of like saying, you empty head, you're worthless. Well, you're in danger of the council. Now, there's no Levitical council here, but we're talking about the council of the throne. We're all going to have to stand before the Son of Man someday, literally. We're in danger of judgment. This is our day of judgment, and those who are walking this walk, we understand that. But getting back to this verse here, it says, but whoever says, you fool, and that Greek word, 3474, is moros. That's where we kind of get the word moron, right? Or stupid, or blockhead is what it'll say in your Greek concordance, the Strong's concordance. I throw in there idiot. It's very similar. If you call someone an idiot, a moron, a stupid, yeah, okay. In the context here, we can see sometimes people are, and we've got to be careful though. We got to make sure we understand we're accurate and true. But he says you're putting yourself in danger. It doesn't say you're just going to go to hell for doing that, because we even say there's times when Yeshua and Yochanan, the immerser, you can call him John the Baptist, they rebuked people who were teaching, not innocent people and the lambs out there, but the shepherds who were teaching, the worthless shepherds, as we see in Ezekiel 34, is that? Talking about the worthless shepherds? Yeah. But people who should know better and who are teaching wrong and they should know better, yeah, there's strong rebukes, vipers and other derogatory terminology, but not against innocent people who are ignorant and don't know better and are just trying to walk in the walk. So we got to be really careful. We don't want to be in danger ourselves in the hellfire. As I pointed out earlier, there's a scripture that says it's better to drown yourself in the ocean or in the sea or any body of water for that matter than to offend one of these little ones, one of these innocent ones. So we've got to be really careful of causing offenses. And using this kind of derogatory terminology is pointing out here. We have to be really careful we're not doing that. If you know Romanian language out there, a similar word is debil. I've heard that. You debil, debil. And that's like saying moron, stupid, idiot, blockhead. There's synonyms here. So we've got to be real careful. Whatever your language is, whatever your culture is, whatever those words are that are synonymous to this, we have to be really careful of our anger and how we're judging or discerning other people. Things to really examine. How have you done over this past year? Right? Verse 23 here, continuing. Therefore, if, there's that big two-letter word, if you bring your gift to the altar, and here we're all trying to come to this feast day and this Passover where the lambs are brought to the altar. But we're doing it in a spiritual way. There's no physical temple. There's no sacrificial system for us to follow in the physical realm right now. So we look at the spiritual realm, and we're following in the right timing and observing the anniversaries and the rehearsals, as we also know them as. If you bring your gift, an offering, whether it be tithes and offerings or however you're wanting to give to Him, to His priesthood in this modern time, with Yeshua being the high priest, of course. He says, but there remember that your brother has something against you. Now again, it's talking about mishpacha, and brothers there's going to be people who are offended because we're walking in the truth, and people who are not walking accurately and won't take correction when they're wrong, and when you know that you're right. There's sometimes when we just know we're right when it comes to walking and keeping the commandments. And even if we're wrong, we have to walk in sincerity and humility. And Matthew 7:6 says, though, if someone's an obvious dog or swine, well, don't just cast your pearls, and don't waste your time with people who are obviously, as the proverb says, fools. It warns us about correcting fools. They're just going to hate you more. But you have to be careful on who you're dealing with in these things. And an offering can also be ourselves as a living sacrifice, as I talked about earlier. So whatever gift you're going to give before that throne, to the Most High, whether it be through physical or even just yourself, as giving yourself, and also to others, sacrificing yourself for others, we have to be really careful and understand all these things. And there's so much to examine. Every year there should be something new or something different or something that hits you that you need to examine yourself a little bit better too, and I'll get more into that a little bit later in this teaching here. But we must examine ourself mostly, before this Pesach. Because there's serious warnings in Scripture that if we don't, we need to really do this properly. As Paul, also known as Shaul, is quoted here in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 27 through 32. It says, "Therefore, whoever eats this bread and drinks this cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner will be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord." Verse 28, "But let a man," again we got to understand this is including women because this is a masculine feminine language that it's coming from, "let a person examine him or herself." Women too here, that's my commentary, right? I think we all understand that. "And so let him or her eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For those who eat and drink in an unworthy manner eat and drink judgment to themselves, not discerning the Lord's body." Now there's a duality in here. There's the body, the unleavened bread, when we're about to take that at the right timing, in the anniversary timing, and we break that, and it's like His broken body. If we're not discerning that and what He did for us, by His stripes we're healed, as it says in Isaiah 53 and 2 Peter chapter 2. We got to know what he did for us. Really contemplate and meditate on that. What his body, what he did, the beating and the suffering, the Roman lictor, and the crown of thorns, going onto his head and just digging into his skull of what was done to him in so many physical, painful ways. It's very sobering to think about. But it's good to kind of think about it, especially, like I said, at more of a high-intensity time. We don't want to just be thinking about that 24/7. Again, there's times to laugh, times to cry, times to be, there's times for every emotion and feeling. But this is a time that is sobering as we draw closer to it. And that's why I like to do it even at the time he was having his Last Supper and at the beginning of the 14th and following that. And then those who want to do it in the afternoon of the 14th. We do it again, and so we have two comings of Messiah. Sometimes it's not bad to do it twice. We want to do it twice, but it's good to be sentimental about that timing that he died for us and was being beaten, and the timing that he was with his disciples trying to explain them how to do it and add some symbolisms to what they were already doing for the Passover. Pesach, as I should say, is more accurate terminology. So we got to be careful we're not guilty of his body, but then also we got to look at our own body. If we're not examining ourselves, as he's pointing out here, we are the body of Messiah too. So not just what he did before he died, and that painful, when he's sweating blood, everything from sweating blood in that prayer to actually sweating blood because it was forced on him. All that he went through. Well, we also are his body. And we have to realize that if we don't examine ourselves properly before taking that wine or grape juice and the bread, the unleavened bread, notice in verse 30 here, he says, "For this reason many are weak and sick among you, and many sleep." In other words, people in the faith are dying prematurely. And I'm not saying we're to be judging other people because, like I said, we got to look at the Job example. Sometimes people suffer because they didn't do anything wrong. But when it's obviously, there's something you can say, okay, there's cause and effect, like David. King David, he did some pretty bad things at one point in his life especially. And even though Nathan said, hey, I forgive you, and Yah forgives you, there's still going to be consequences to sin. Even when we're ignorant or sometimes we're deceived, even with forgiveness, there's some consequences that sometimes only for our physical life. And if we can learn the lessons and repent, it won't affect our spiritual and eternal life, which is really the big picture. So we have to really examine ourselves. This is very sobering. Before you take this Pesach, it shouldn't be just like a fun party. That's it. Part of it is. I'm not saying it's not fun and it's a party. His kind of partying is fun and exciting and zealous, but there's also a sobering aspect to it. You don't want to do it in an unworthy manner. Make sure we get the planks out of our eyes and the slivers or whatever we can see and work on and change. Verse 31, "For if we judge ourselves," and I put in there correctly, accurately, worthily, Paul says we would not be judged. So we want to be able to catch these in ourselves before other people catch them and before Yah really kind of decides to chasten us. It would be nice if we can correct these things and we wouldn't have to be judged if we can see things and correct them in a good, speedily time period. And sometimes some things need a lot of patience, and addictions and backsliding happens sometimes, but he's got so much faith and patience, and thankfully there's grace, that amazing grace, yes, but it's not permissiveness. I'm not saying that. Verse 32 here, getting back to the scripture, says, "But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord." And this is a general statement, of course. There's the Job type experiences out there too. But sometimes we're chastened by him, that we may not be condemned with the world. So the chastening and the trials are something to even examine, and maybe we need to straighten out our walk. Maybe we're a little crooked in our walk, and it needs to be straightened out a little bit more accurately. Again, I'm not pointing any fingers. This is the time for us to look at ourselves and examine ourselves, as he's saying here. As we also see in 2 Corinthians 13 here, it says, examine yourselves as to whether you are in the faith. Wow, now what a statement. If it's just believe and faith alone, well, he says make sure you're in the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not know yourselves that? Right? I put in there, since this is a King James Version, I put Yeshua Messiah is in you, unless indeed you are disqualified. So look at that. It's not once saved, always saved. This is one of the many scriptures that proves that we can be disqualified. In Revelation it says that someone can take your crown. Be careful that no one takes your crown. And it says that those who've not been blotted out of the book of life, your name can be in the book of life, okay, you're saved, but if your name gets blotted out, well, it's not once saved, always saved. And that's this easy cakewalk type religion that builds mega churches, yes, might be good for that, but we have to understand all the scriptures and to have this proper, healthy fear of the second death, as it also talked about in the end of Revelation. Not to go off on a tangent there, but this is a serious walk we're on. So how have you handled your tests and your trials over the last year? I'm not asking for any confessions. I'm not a Catholic priest or anything else, but if you have sinned against me, well then, yeah, you should come to me and say, hey, brother, I've offended you, or if I find something out there that I've offended somebody, I should, or if I don't know and I've offended you out there, anyone out there, feel free to come to me and say, hey, Russ, you've offended me in this way or in that way, and we'll have to evaluate whether I did the right thing or said the right thing, and maybe you're too hypersensitive or taking it the wrong way, and through love, iron sharpening iron, we can try to work these things out before the Passover especially. Like Yeshua said, don't go to that altar and give your gift unless you've reconciled with people who are truly mishpacha. As it says in 1 Peter 1:7, these trials are so that the true metal, think of gold, right? Silversmiths, of your faith, far more valuable than gold, which perishes through refined fire, may come to light in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Messiah Yeshua. That's the Tree of Life version. That's their brackets they put in there. That's not what I added. I put more of the squared type brackets when it's my commentary. But these trials you've gone through the last year, this is something to examine. Okay, did I bring these things on through sinning or making mistakes, or am I like Job in these situations? These are things to examine ourselves with. Or if we've offended someone or someone's offended us and they seem like true brothers and sisters, to try to approach them and try to resolve and try to have forgiveness if there needs to be, especially if there's any kind of grudges or hard feelings against anyone who's truly in the body. And we can know them by their fruits, of course. None of us are perfect. I'm not saying we need to expect perfection, but these are for imperfect people who are striving for perfection and truly sincere. Okay, 1 Peter, jumping down to chapter 4, in 12 and 13, it says, Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. Okay, even these strange fiery trials that are going on. A lot of times, even this COVID-19, there's been diseases and black plagues and a lot of worse things than this that have gone on in past time in history. We got to be careful not to jump the gun and just say, okay, we're at the end and the tribulation is going to start this year, but it is theoretically possible. I've done some teachings lately on Bible prophecy 2020 plus, looking at the timing of his return on a certain holy day and counting back 1,260 days, puts us right around Passover, give or take a month. So these times we're in right now are something to be extra watchful for and discerning and being ready. It says, like in the days of Lot, so shall it be. In the days of Noah, these things happened in just one day. People are buying and selling and getting married. And so there's things to look at. I pointed out in that teaching, don't want to go off on that tangent here. But also remembering James chapter 1, verses 2 through 8. What does that say? A lot of you out there know. James here says right at the beginning about being joyful for the results. Not just we're masochists loving trials, but we look at the results of our trials and our tests. It should, either a test or trial is going to draw you closer to Him because you make the right decisions and the priorities, or I've seen people make the wrong decisions and priorities and they drift away and they fall away. As when Scripture says, falling from grace. So we got to be careful and look at the trials with an optimistic mindset, as James points out here, and picking up in verse 2 here. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let the patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect. You can also say that's mature, yes, and complete, lacking nothing. Now some people say, well, that means I want a Rolls Royce, or I want a Tesla, or I want a Lamborghini. Otherwise I'm lacking something, or I have to be married, or I don't want to be married anymore. Whatever the issues are, the grass always looks greener on the other side, and sometimes we want things that are not according to His will, as James points out also. And you go back in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, you ask for amiss, and you're asking for your will more than His will. But verse 5 here, he says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask the Most High, who gives to all liberally without reproach. As long as we don't have the wrong motives for wisdom. Sometimes people want wisdom, or people want money. People want things for the wrong reasons. And you look at people who win the lottery, right? They're in poverty, and all of a sudden having all this money ruins their life and their relationships and their family. So sometimes we want things we think are going to be better for us. And, have you heard that song or that saying, thank Him for unanswered prayers? So don't lose heart if you're not getting everything and you feel like you're lacking this or that. Verse 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask. He gives liberally, and it'll be given to him. Verse 6, but let him ask in faith with no doubting. Okay, if it doesn't happen in your timing or according to your will, don't doubt. Don't say, okay, well, He's not answering, He's not keeping His promises in the Scriptures to do all this and lack nothing. He says, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that person suppose that he will receive anything from the Most High. You say Yahweh, people pronounce it Yahuwah or Yehovah, but we know His name, His authority, His reputation, His character, everything He represents is expressed in the Scriptures, are like a window into His mind and His character, and how He feels and thinks about it. Everything is through His Word. Verse 8 here, he is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. We don't want to be that way. If we're getting unstable, if we're tossed to and fro, not just doctrinally, sometimes it's doctrinally too, or it's just in our faith and in our trust and our belief in Him and what He's doing in our life, bad things happen, and sometimes people do die prematurely, and that wrecks people's faith. They don't stay positive and optimistic about it. But we have to know that He's got reasons, even though we don't always know why sometimes. Notice in Philippians 4 here, it says, I know what it is to live with humble means, and I know what it is to live in prosperity. Whether you're in poverty and suffering, or whether you're rich and wealthy. He says, in any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of contentment. Interesting. I like the Tree of Life version here on that. Both to be filled and to be hungry. To have abundance and to suffer need. He's content no matter what happens. And, the Scriptures, he says he was shipwrecked. He was beaten, whipped. Was it 3 different times? 40 minus 1, 39 whips. Wow. Just getting punched or hit one time would be enough for me. Boy, poor Paul and Yeshua and the others. they didn't waver in their faith, even though they were being beaten and whipped and shipwrecked and starving and naked and going through all these difficulties. They didn't say, well, where is he? Where is he now? Where's this God of Moses? He's not in my life. No, we've got to be strong and faithful. And even if he's chastening us, sometimes it's doing it just simply out of love because he loves us. Take it as a compliment, not as a discouragement. But hey, if he didn't correct me, he wouldn't love me. And a lot of kids kind of figure that out if their parents are too liberal and let them get away and be loosey-goosey with them. They end up making bad mistakes and wish they had parents that would give them a little more curfew or a restriction on being with certain people out there. Not to get off on a tangent here, but in Hebrews chapter 12 here, verses 3 through 11, it says, "For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls." Right? You have not yet resisted to bloodshed. This is talking about physical persecution. Striving against sin. The temptation to sin, to avoid persecution. A lot of us, most people, most believers haven't had to do that. Many in history have over the last few thousand years. But a lot of them don't. If you don't, he's saying appreciate that. Verse 5, "And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons." He says, "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Most High, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom he loves, he chastens and scourges every son," or we can say child there, "whom he loves. If you endure the chastening, then he deals with you as with sons," as with children. "For what child is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate." And the Old King James, I think, says a bastard, but that's a little bad word today. We don't want to use bad words. That's a softer word there, illegitimate, and we're not really his sons. Verse 9, "Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us." Well, hopefully you have out there. Not everyone does, generally speaking. "And we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live?" Jumping down to verse 11, "Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but it's painful." Yes, we don't want to be masochist about it, but nevertheless, afterwards it yields this peaceable fruit, this good fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So look at your trials as we examine ourselves, even if we're chastened and we've made big mistakes. Look at that as an opportunity to become more righteous, not to repeat the same mistakes. We don't want to do backsliding. We want to avoid that, and when we catch ourselves doing that, we want to get back on track and try to avoid making these big mistakes. To reduce the chastening, right? That's what examining ourselves and obeying better is stimulating us to try to reduce that chastening. Like the law of gravity. That's just a physical law. To the degree you break it, it will break you. And you can't examine it under a microscope or see it in a physical, tangible way, but we see the results of gravity and the results of breaking it. Well, I know there's flat earthers out there that don't believe in gravity either, so I know you'll probably disagree with me with that, but that's okay. I think we can still love each other. But we want to reduce this chastening. As it says, well, if you want a list, start with the 10 words, as we call it. 10 words, 10 commandments. Especially that 10th one. This is where all the other sins begin. In the mind and in the heart is that 10th one. And remember, those who are first shall be last. That first one, you see this priority of how important these 10 are in an order of priority. And you get to that 10th one, that's where we all mistake and slip up the most. But this is where all our sins in the previous 9 start. And so the last can be like the first in that regard. We got to nip it in the bud, as it says. And so try to examine your mind and your heart, any coveting that you have, any envy of others, whether in this walk and this faith. Sometimes, as Paul talks about the different parts of the body, sometimes the toe wants to be the mouth, or sometimes wants to be the eyeball, and maybe the fingernail doesn't like being a fingernail, wants to be the voice. And so we've got to look at our calling, look at our gifts, see where we're, and be content and be happy just to support the body and to be there and to be part of it and to help others. And so, but you know, there's all different types. The physical materialism of some people having more blessings and better health, better physical. It's easy to get overly wrongfully jealous. There's a good form of every emotion. You know, our Creator gets jealous when we are cheating on Him or we are prioritizing others above Him. And any mates out there, you know, when your mate starts wandering and looking and eavesdropping, you know, when there's temptations that they're giving weakness to. There's right forms of jealousy of what belongs to us that we don't want to lose in the right ways, like our Creator gets jealous in the right ways. It's good to have the wrong, you know, anger, and in righteous ways. There's a wrong form of anger, pride. There's a good kind of pride and a bad kind of pride. Right? You know, if your child does good, you say, "Oh wow, I'm proud of you." Yeah, but you know, you don't want to be so proud that it's like, oh yeah, I've got the best child in town, and we got to compare with the Joneses over there, and comparing ourselves among ourselves. We got to compare ourselves to perfection, the one who came down in the flesh, the Word which became flesh, if I may put it that way, as the Scriptures say. You know, He set us a perfect example how to walk as He walked. So if we have any coveting, jealousy, wanting what others have, too much, let me put it that way, if it's too much, where we're getting to where we're just, it's hurting our faith, and we're getting too discouraged because we're not being blessed as much as others are. We gotta try to nip these type of things. And if the body is rejoicing over here because they're being blessed more than us, we should be happy for them, not jealous or envious. And be an encouragement. Well, if I walk this faith more accurately, I can see He is a rewarder, those who diligently seek Him. And so we don't have to have envies and coveting and jealousies. These are things that we can examine ourselves that are common. Nipping it in the heart. You know, hating can be like a form of murder, as the Scripture says. Lusting, you're already committing adultery in the heart. So we've got to nip these things in the bud. And knowing and being able to do good, even. As it says in James 4:17. If you know that something's good and you can go do it, but you don't do it, well, that's another form of sin. I'm not saying things that we don't have, say you don't have enough gifts or talents or income or whatever to help, but if there's something you can help and do for others, but you don't, well, that's something we've got to examine ourselves. I'm not saying it's a cookie cutter, always a sin, but this is another general statement that we need to examine. Are we sinning by being too selfish and taking care of ourselves too much and saving our own skins? Again, the Pesach, the Passover, the Pesach of the lambs and the ultimate lamb is about sacrificing for others too, as well as working out our own salvation. So, can you list any faith weaknesses that in yourself? You know, do you worry too much about the future, about things that are coming? I call it futuristic worries or anxieties. There's post-traumatic experiences that a lot of us have dysfunctional backgrounds and broken hearts and broken families. And I'm not casting any stones. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I see, yeah, these are things that I'm examining myself too on, you know, whatever, you know, mistakes I've made in the past, and there's consequences. You know, there's things that we all have done, you know, that we can see that there's, you know, hopefully we don't repeat the same mistakes that we've made in the past. And whatever must be deleted. I put that word delete because it's easy to do that on a computer with a button. Just push that button and delete it. Leave it behind. There's things that we all need to leave behind that shouldn't be part of our future. And it's weakening our faith if we don't. And it's weakening our walk. Because obedience, when you're not obeying, when you're sinning, your faith is also weakened. You don't have that confidence and that joy as much. You're living with guilt and doubts. So there's some things that we have control over, some things we don't. And these are the things we need to examine. So keep working on it, overcoming. Let's get better self-control, better control of ourselves, channeling our thoughts into captivity. Did you know why phone numbers, for example, are 7 digits? I just learned this with some continuing education for my profession, my day job. The reason 7 numbers were chosen is because the brain can only handle so much information and hold on to it for a long period of time. And so we can remember these phone numbers for years and years and years. But if it's more than 7, the studies have shown that the brain can't handle as much. So, when we need to push something out, that's why we start having problems with anxiety and worries and doubts. When we start having that, well, if you want to empty a bottle or your brain of something, you can't just create a perfect vacuum. There's always going to be some air and molecules in that bottle, some atoms. But we need to fill it with something else, something better, and do what we can to push out whatever is bad in that bottle or in that brain or in that heart. Or circumcising, that's another good metaphor. Cutting off the flesh, fleshly parts that are not really good to be there, that are attached somehow, that are causing us to be carnally minded, carnally hearted. So we need to be consistently improving ourselves. This is a walk that we try to improve every year. And whatever you cannot overcome needs much more prayers and fasting even. Sometimes I've just had to fast weekly until things would go away, or as often as I could. Fasting and combined with prayer is even more powerful than just praying alone. Not that he can hear any prayer and answer it any time he wants, but we look at the scriptures and we see the importance of fasting and prayer put together is even more powerful. Not if it's for our will, though. If we do it for our will, Isaiah 58 points out that, hey, he doesn't hear that kind of prayers and fasting. For our voice to be heard. He wants us to fast for the right reasons, for the right motives. He's looking at our heart and our mind, why we're fasting, why are we praying for this and for that. And are we saying at the end of the day, as we say at the end of the day or end of the prayer, not my will be done, but your will be done, even if we have to sweat blood in the trials that we're going through, because the anxiety and the difficulties are so tough, so hard. We have to be willing to do that. That's counting the cost that we should have done, and if we haven't done, well, this is our time period to get high intensity, examining on how to do these better, to do everything we're doing, forgiving and reconciling with others as possible. Again, that's a big key as part of this examining time period, this high intensity period that we're entering. To overcome whatever is holding you back. Now, sometimes I say, I don't need my spine because it's always holding me back. Well, hope you like my sarcasm and jokes, and because my spine is holding me back. Oh. But seriously, getting back to the seriousness of this, is we need to overcome whatever's holding us back from spiritual growth, from obeying Him better, drawing closer to Him, having a relationship with Him and His body and His believers. What is holding you back? As it says in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, therefore, since you have such a great cloud of witnesses. Now, witnesses, these are people watching us. You're in an arena. And whether you're at work, whether you're at school, whether you're going shopping, whether you're going here or there, people see you. And if you got your tzitzits on, they're like, ooh, you're a witness in that way too. Wow, is he Jewish? Well, that's the way the Messianics wear it. He's got to be Messianic. Jude isn't figuring that out because a lot of them don't put the blue in the thread like the commandment says. Nevertheless, anyway, we are witnesses. We're surrounded by them in our life. We're lights in this world, salt of the earth. But as lights, we can be in even dark places. We're even more recognized when we're in dark places. So let us also get rid of every weight and entangling sin. I like that a little bit better than the King James. King James will say, lay aside the weight. But this says, get rid of it. Get rid of every weight and entangling sin. Because sin is like this trap. You know, those of you like to trap animals. I used to try to catch birds with, you know, a little trap and pull a little string when I was a kid. And, you know, I try to, you know, trap them. But see, sin tries to trap us. But we got to be like those quick birds that, you know, those quick animals that can see through the trap and not get so easily trapped. Like a fox. It's hard to catch, hard to trap. And my name, Russell, etymology of that goes back to fox-like or terrier fox. So people say, ooh, yeah, you must be a wolf or a fox in a bad way. But I said, well, the bad guys have a hard time catching me. And so, yeah, there's a good way and a bad way of looking at this. But we need to get rid of sin, and that sin will trap us. We can, if we're not aware, we can slip into temptation. Remember, Yeshua said, pray that you not enter temptation. He knows which ones are too great for us, and He can shield us and protect us from going into situations that we don't have the self-control for, even with His Spirit there to help us. But what is sin? Again, I put there 1 John 3:4. Sin is the transgression. Any sin, any transgression of a commandment in the Torah. Again, like I said, go through those 10 commandments. If you're profaning the Sabbath, and especially if you're doing it on the wrong days, and the information is there for you, you've got to get rid of whatever is causing you to profane it. Whether it be your job, or even if your family says you can't do this, you've got to be willing to sacrifice and get rid of that weight or anything. Put things behind us that need to be put behind us, and let us run with endurance, as it says, the race that is set before us, focusing on Yeshua, the initiator and the perfecter of our faith. I like that better too, the initiator. Of course, no one can come to Him unless the Father draws him. But, you know, He's initiating, and He also, through time, is perfecting us. We're striving for that perfection. He's not just so He is the author and the finisher. You can look at it that way too, of our faith. But you're not finished until you're perfect, or in that kingdom, and no longer flesh and blood, because the flesh and blood can't inherit that kingdom. So He's working on us. We are works in progress. We all are. And He is a rewarder of those who diligently, and diligently I think of consistently, not quitting, seeking Him and His truth. His truth too. You know, you can't just seek Him without His truth. And you can't just seek truth without Him. And you can only get so far. You can improve and show some improvements. But we see in Matthew 6:33 and 34, He says, do not worry about tomorrow. You know, that'll take care of itself. Seek first that kingdom. And in Hebrews 11:6, it says that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him, consistently. Don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. But endure to the end. If something is causing you to, or you're getting close to that, you need to examine yourself and do some fasting, some praying, or whatever it is under your control that you can do to get more zealous. Because as we look at the 7 congregations in Revelation 2 and 3, they all are told to overcome. For he who overcomes, he or she overcomes. And there's great rewards for overcoming. And notice it says in Proverbs 24:10, if you faint in the day of adversity, including this COVID-19 time period, if you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. It doesn't have to be small. We can have the faith and the courage and to examine ourselves and still keep these feast days and holy days, no matter who or what is trying to stop us. Let's do the best we can. So let us prepare for Pesach better than in the past, if it's possible. Can we show any improvement? Can we see any improvements in us? Let's do that the best we can. Physically, yes. But even more importantly, spiritually, the higher level of improvement. How can we improve? Yeah, physically, we got to get the leavening out. Doing it physically is good. We're to be doing this, and it's a good object lesson to teach us how hard it is to do spiritually. It's hard to do it physically too, and we find imperfections in us with doing that. And here sometimes during those 7 days, there's something we didn't find, and it pops up somewhere, or we didn't read the label closely enough. And each year we kind of learn by making mistakes. Sometimes I'm such in a routine, especially if you're at work or you're somewhere and you just grab something, some bread or anything. It's like, oh, wait, I forgot for a second there. I'm still on these days. And so it's easy when you're more in the world. The more you're in the world, the more it is easy to forget. So this is why we got to come out and to be separate and to think differently during these time periods. Because as commanded to the Gentiles also, not just for the Jewish people to keep these feasts. Sometimes you hear that, if you're not Jewish, you don't have to keep them. That's in both Judaism and Christianity for different reasons that I won't go off into. But notice in 1 Corinthians 5, verses 6 through 8, it says, your boasting is no good. Don't you know that a little hametz, that's the Hebrew word. This is a Tree of Life version again. A little leavening agent. It's talking about leavening agents. Leavens the whole batch of dough. I think of batch as being body. This body of dough, or the body of Messiah. A little bit in your body, as our bodies are the temple of the Spirit, the Ruach. Verse 7, get rid of the old hametz. That old leavening. Yes, he's not saying, okay, we're going to just not worry about the physical anymore. We're just going to focus on the spiritual only, and the spiritual does away with the physical. Notice he's saying that they're in tandem here, but there's a higher priority, as he says, so you may be a new batch. If you get rid of that old physical leavening, this is what is a stepping stone that leads to the spiritual realm, to be a new batch, to be a new creation, just as you are unleavened. For Messiah, here he is. Yes, he's the Lamb. He didn't do it so we don't have to. He did it so we can too. For Messiah, our Passover Lamb has been sacrificed. And not so that, okay, we don't have to do it anymore. He says, therefore, quite the contrary, right? Therefore, let us celebrate the feast, not with the old hametz, not with that old leavening. And I like the King James where it says nor, which is to say neither, the hametz of malice and wickedness. So here he's talking about sins, how leavening during these 7 days is parallel to sins. And I'm going to go through a teaching on that from the Hebrew. And how Paul gets this is he's not just inventing this for the new covenant. He is getting this from the Hebrew of the Torah. And I'll get into that during those 7 days, which is very fascinating. Mind blower for me, something I just kind of learned some deeper levels on that over this past year, especially from one of Herb Solinsky's teachings, kind of triggered it and what he taught on it. So notice here, continuing in this verse here, but with unleavened bread, the matzah, that's what matzah is, of sincerity and truth. So yes, truth. Very important to see the spiritual and the physical. The object lessons teach us. People say, oh, I got the Spirit, I don't need physical reminders. Well, then why are you wearing that cross? Why do you even go to church if you don't need reminders? You got the Spirit? Why are you still sinning? Well, not that we're going to be perfect just because, but we're to strive for that. When we see sins, we're to try to get rid of it. Whatever needs to be left behind needs to be left behind. I'm not talking about the rapture being left behind. I'm talking about what needs to be left behind. And to move forward in the next year, to whatever we can see in this past year that needs to be left behind, it needs to be left behind. Whatever we need to get rid of it. Right? And whatever we need to leave behind that is not good, let me throw in that disclaimer. Anything that's not good, that needs to be leaving behind, anything in our past or our present, we need to leave it behind. And to heal, and to improve, to be more like Him. which really during this time period is about being unleavened, putting out the sin, to be free from sin, no longer slave to sin, born again, as it says in 1 John 3, that he is born again, no longer practices sin, and he's no longer sinning. So that's what we're working towards, getting it all out and behind us, and not repeating a lot of this baggage that we're carrying, myself included. I'm not perfect. I'm still striving for it, and this is how we have relationship. You know, you hear people out there say, well, you may be keeping the commandments, but I've got a relationship with Jesus, and I don't need those commandments to have that relationship. I say, whoa, try to have a relationship with anybody without boundaries, without instructions on how to have a happy marriage or happy friendship? Those of us in this walk know this walk. But let's strive for this perfection, to be unleavened as he is unleavened, to become more like him, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk in every way possible that he inspires and works in us.